Hi, everyone. Let's go ahead and get started with the meeting. Thanks for your patience. We are recording this meeting, and I'll invite everyone, because we have a lot of participants, to just go ahead and post in chat any questions that you have. At the end of the presentation, I'll try to go through and answer many of those questions. So thank you all for joining. I'm Professor James Adams at Arizona State University. I'm also the president of Autism Diagnostics and president of Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics. Most importantly, I'm the proud father of a daughter with autism, which is what motivates me in all the work that we do. So tonight, what we're going to do is talk about bacterial and yeast toxins that are extremely elevated in most children with autism. We're going to talk about our new discovery I'm very excited about, and also our new testing methods that we're making available to the public, and treatment methods. And so we'll be talking about all three of those together tonight. And so what I want to do is just, again, express how important we think this subject is. That we've known for many years that worse gut problems relate to worse autism symptoms. We know that about 40% of children and adults with autism have obvious chronic gut problems: constipation, diarrhea, bloating, and pain. We know worse gut symptoms associated with worse autism. But what we've also discovered now is that it's not just the people who have obvious gut problems, but there are also many hidden gut problems in children with autism. A paper we published over a dozen years ago, which has been cited by over 1,000 other papers since then, shows us very clearly that the children with autism in this plot shown in red who have gut problems, compared to the children with autism in blue who don't have gut problems. The ones who have gut problems have worse speech challenges, worse social challenges, worse sensory and cognitive problems, and worse physical and behavioral problems. And so we've known for many years is this very strong connection between the gut and the brain. And so before we go into more detail on that, I want to give you a little bit of background on the human gut microbiome, just to bring everyone up to speed, that it's not just a question of having bad gut bacteria, but it's also a lack of the beneficial ones, that a healthy gut bacteria do many good things. They help us digest our food and produce vitamins. They produce butyrate from fiber. And most Americans, unfortunately, consume too little fiber, and so they don't produce enough butyrate, which is the main food for the cells that line their gut. And that's really one of the major causes of gut problems in the United States and throughout the developed world. Just not enough fiber from fruits and vegetables. But also our gut bacteria help provide water balance, so our stool isn't too soft or too hard. They help our gut microbiota help regulate our immune system and compete against pathogenic bacteria. Unfortunately, there are a lot of pathogenic bacteria that can damage our intestines, causing even bleeding or having to have the intestines removed. They can cause severe gut symptoms, constipation, diarrhea, and more, and those can be fatal. They can produce some very nasty toxins which can leach out of the gut into the brain. That's a big focus of what we'll talk about tonight. They also disrupt the immune system, and they compete against the good bacteria. So the microbiome is very important in affecting our health of our gut and also our health of our brain, because those beneficial metabolites can hopefully leave our gut and help improve the health of the rest of our body. But unfortunately, the harmful bacteria and yeast produce a lot of toxins that can also leak out of the gut and damage the brain and the rest of the body. So the major discovery we made in the last few months, that I'm so excited to share with you, I had no idea the number was this high. 90% of children we've now identified have very toxic bacteria and yeast metabolites at extremely high levels. One example that we've known about for many years is p-cresol sulfate. 17 studies of it in children with autism. Every study shows that it's elevated in children with autism in a subset, about 25% in every study in 17 studies in many different countries. We know that higher levels of it correlate with worse autism symptoms. We know it's toxic to the brain and body in many ways. I'll go through that. and it's made by 60 different bacteria. This is just one example of many other metabolites that we've discovered that are also very harmful to the body and the brain. So the whole premise of what we want to do is replace harmful bacteria with beneficial bacteria. So stop producing the harmful toxins and instead be producing the beneficial metabolites to improve our health. And it turns out the treatment we'll be talking about, MTT, is the one treatment that's able to greatly reduce levels of this toxic substance down to normal. So just to give you a little bit more background um, for the into picresol and the many harmful effects it has, the bottom line is it affects the whole body. It affects the gut, the brain, the mitochondria, the liver, the kidneys, the immune system, and autism symptoms. Just to give you a little bit more information about this, in the gut, picresol acts as an antibiotic. It kills off other gut bacteria, promoting the bacteria that produce it. So once you have an infection of bacteria that make picresol, they tend to stay for a long time. It also weakens the gut bacteria, the gut barrier, allowing toxins from the gut to leach out of the gut into the rest of the body and into the brain. And we know that many children with autism have a leaky gut or increased intestinal permeability. In the brain, these picresol has many toxic effects. It affects neurotransmitter synthesis. It impairs the growth of the neurons in the brain, so they don't make connections very well. And it irreversibly poisons the enzyme that converts dopamine, an important neurotransmitter, into noradrenaline and other neurotransmitters. In the mitochondria, picresol poisons the mitochondria, so they don't produce as much ATP, which is the major fuel for the body and the brain. And they also increase reactive oxygen species, so it causes oxidative stress. So by damaging the mitochondria, which are present in almost every cell in the body, almost every organ in the body, it affects the whole rest of our body. In the liver converts picresol into picresol sulfate to try to excrete it. But we now know that we've known for many years, over 25 years, that children with autism have a much decreased ability to sulfate, to get rid of toxins. And so they're using up the precious sulfate pool to try to get rid of picresol. Also, some of the picresol is converted by enzymes in the liver into even more harmful substances called quinone methides that are, again, very reactive oxygen species, causing inflammation throughout the body. In the kidneys, picresol has been known for many years to be a nephrotoxin, very toxic to the kidneys. It induces, again, oxidative stress and inflammation there, so the kidneys don't filter waste products from our body very well. And adults with autism have a much higher rate of chronic kidney disease, and this is probably one of the contributing reasons, because the gut bacteria are making these poisons that it can affect and damage the kidneys. In the immune system, it decreases the activity of the immune system. So the macrophages, which are an important part of the immune system that attack uh, uh, potential bacteria or viruses, they are no longer able to do that. And the immune system is also less able to identify enemies. But probably what's most relevant to us is that when picresol is administered to mice or to other animals, it causes autism symptoms in those animals. And so if it can cause autism symptoms in those animals, it's not surprising that higher levels of it, the more of it you have, the more severe your autism. So there's a powerful study done in which they administered picresol to mice, and those mice developed autistic symptoms, separated from one another, became antisocial, developed other odd behaviors. When they received a fecal transplant from healthy animals, they recovered. They restored their socialization. They began interacting with one another again. So it's very exciting. If this works in animals, it's no surprise that the microbiota transplant can also help humans who have been affected by precresol. So the new results I want to share with you is that we looked at a study of 50 children with autism, 47 healthy typical children, all ages 2 to 11 years. we measured over 40 different microbial-induced derived metabolites in their urine. We found that 32 of them were significantly higher in children with autism than in typical children. Most of these had never previously been discovered in autism before, never before been measured. So this is very important. So we knew about p-cresol, we knew about a few others like indoxyl sulfate. We've now identified many, many others. So these 32 metabolites fall into two categories. Ones that are either modifications of phenylalanine or tyrosine, which is then the precursor to go make important neurotransmitters like dopamine, noradrenaline, and adrenaline. And the other category are modifications of tryptophan, which goes on to make serotonin and melatonin. So the bottom line is that these two categories of metabolites have major effects on our neurotransmitter system and can therefore greatly affect autism-related symptoms. 17 of them are known to be harmful to the body, like p-cresol. The rest of them we just don't have enough research on yet, but they're very similar chemically, and they're probably having very similar chemical effects in terms of disrupting our neurotransmitter system, causing oxidative stress, damaging mitochondria, etc. So just to show you one example of the 32 we measured, this is beta-carbolene. It's produced by yeast. And this is a plot of how much is present in each child with autism. So the triangles are the children with autism, the blue squares are the typical kids. So the average level on the y-axis, 1 times, is the median level of the typical children. You can see they can have up to 10 times the median level. But above there, we have some children with autism. About 30% of them have levels that are 10, 100, 1,000 times higher than that of the typical children. These are what we call extremely elevated levels, above that of any typical child. So this beta-carbolene is a harmful metabolite of yeast that affects serotonin and melatonin. So it disrupts sleep, disrupts your cognitive function and your mood. So when we look at levels of all of these 32 different metabolites, we count how many metabolites are elevated in each child with autism. It ranges from 1 to 24 in most cases. On average, children with autism have 7 extremely elevated microbial metabolites, meaning higher levels that are higher than any typical child. So in this chart, we're showing in red the number of metabolites from a microbiota that are extremely elevated in the children with autism. The blue squares on the bottom are the typical kids we measured, and none of them have any levels, by definition, have any extreme levels. So bottom line is that looking at children from ages 2 to 11, across the board, they generally have about 7 metabolites. Some have only 1 or 2 that are elevated. Some have up to 23 metabolites that are very elevated. And so we can use this as a diagnostic test. If you have 1 or more microbial metabolites, then we say you're a child with autism, and otherwise you're a typically developing child. So this test is 97% accurate at distinguishing children with autism versus typical children. So with just urine, we now have the potential diagnostic test that is very consistent with, as I said, the 17 other studies for p-cresol and many other studies for other toxic metabolites. But also what's very interesting is there's not much trend versus age. This suggests that children below the age of 2, probably many of them also have these microbial metabolites, and also older adolescents and adults with autism probably also have these microbial metabolites. We know that GI symptoms in autism almost always start in infancy. That's when the neurological symptoms begin. And that's when these high levels of these microbial metabolites begin. So we hypothesize that there's a strong connection, that the presence of these toxins early in infant life affect brain development, affect the onset of autism symptoms, I'm not saying they're the only cause, but we're saying there's very strong evidence that they are a major contributing factor to autism symptoms beginning in infancy and continuing to poison the body for many, many years if untreated. But the good news is there's hope. We're coming to that. Now, it's very interesting. 3 of the 50 children with autism did not have elevated microbial metabolites. But we discovered, or I should say, my very bright PhD student, Christina Flynn, discovered that these 3 children had other major errors of metabolism. So these 3 other major inborn errors that are probably genetic. So bottom line is we're saying that it seems there are few children with autism who have autism associated with a genetic disorder. Almost all the others seem to have a major problem due to gut bacteria toxins. So we're going to be very bold tonight and propose a new autism phenotype that we call ASD, microbially derived metabolites. And our definition is very simple. It's not a fuzzy definition where you go to see a physician, pediatrician, and they evaluate your child and say, maybe they have autism. Let's keep following them. No, this is a hard laboratory measurement. We take a urine sample and we measure, is there any one of 32 toxic metabolites, toxic poisons present in this child at levels above that of any typical child? And if they are, then that's our definition, a hard laboratory definition of this phenotype. Again, there's an average of these, on average, 7 microbial metabolites. Some children have fewer, some have a lot more. Some of these primarily affect just neurological symptoms. So yeast metabolites, for example, seem to primarily just affect the brain and not the gut, whereas others, like P-cresol, affect both the gut and the brain. There's a huge variety in which metabolites are elevated in each person, and that's why it's taken decades to figure this out. Some children have P-cresol, other children have beta-carbolene, other children have other metabolites, most of which were never searched for before. So by doing this comprehensive search, we can now say that about 90% of children with autism who don't have a genetic disorder like Fragile X, they seem to have these hidden microbial metabolites. And what's so exciting is that our phase 1 MTT study was able to greatly decrease these levels of at least one metabolite, P-cresol, down to normal. And we're now checking all these other metabolites as well. So just to conclude this section, we've known for many years that about 40% of children with autism have obvious gut problems, but we now know that many more, almost all of them, have hidden gut problems. These gut infections from bacteria and yeast that are making these very harmful metabolites that affect the gut, the brain, the kidneys, the immune system, the mitochondria, which then goes on to affect every organ in the body, and our detoxification system. What's most important is that neurologically, they affect our very important neurotransmitters, serotonin and dopamine, that affects your cognition, your attention, your mood, your happiness. And also, they affect melatonin. We know that most children with autism have very disrupted sleep because of abnormal melatonin. We've wondered why. Now, this seems to be one of the major reasons why. And so we know that these microbial metabolites, some of them like P-cresol, when administered to mice, cause autistic symptoms in the mice, and higher levels of them correlate with worse autism symptoms. So we now have this test we've developed that seems to be 97% accurate in differentiating children with autism who don't have a single gene disorder from typically developing kids. So we're proposing this as a phenotype. And to put it very simply in lay terms, our data suggests that most children with autism are drunk on these microbial metabolites in the same way that alcohol, which is a toxic yeast metabolite, can affect brain function, emotion regulation, etc. But these metabolites we've identified, some of these are 100 times as toxic as alcohol. So we believe that in the same way that someone who's drunk if once they get away from that alcohol, they can recover. Decreasing these harmful metabolites, we think, is very likely to improve symptoms the same way it did in the mice. So microbial transplant therapy can decrease levels of precresol sulfate to normal, and it likely decreases the levels of the many other toxic metabolites. And we know also it increases the beneficial metabolites like butyrate to restore the gut health, make the gut healthy again, and help prevent these infections. So, very excited about this, but now there's more to share with you. Now I want to share with you how we're working on getting our research test commercially available. So how to test for these hidden gut infections in autism. And so testing for these gut infections is very complex because we cannot easily see inside the gut. There are thousands of possible bacteria and yeast in the gut. Many of them are beneficial, but some are harmful, and often what we need is the right balance between them. It's often unclear which species or even strain are producing toxic metabolites. So we think the best option is to test for the toxic metabolites in the urine, because if they're in the urine, that means they escaped from the gut and got into the rest of the body, probably the brain as well. So at ASU, we spun off a company called Autism Diagnostics. I'm the leader of it. ASU is one of the largest universities in the country, and I'm proud to say that we received a first place award that year for being the top most promising startup company. We've now been collaborating with an established lab in Ludos for 3 years to get this test commercialized. And our new test from Autism Diagnostics and Anna Ludos is now developed. This is our first generation test, and we'll be continuing to improve on it over the next 6 months or so. But what does this combined gut health test tell us? It's a very simple urine test. It's easy to collect and freeze and ship, and families can just order it themselves. You don't need a physician's prescription. The test includes testing for several toxic yeast metabolites, also testing for many toxic bacterial metabolites, both those that affect dopamine system, like precresol sulfate, and also those that affect the serotonin and melatonin system, doxyl sulfate. It also measures the key amino acids that are the precursors to serotonin and dopamine. So that's tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine. And then also it measures gluten and casein peptides. We know that many children with autism are sensitive to gluten and casein, and this test allows us to detect those. So what's the interpretation of this test? Well, first of all, if you aren't sure if your child has autism, you can go ahead and use this as a screening test because it's 86% accurate in distinguishing autism from neurotypical kids. It doesn't have all our metabolites in it yet. With the ones it already has, 72% of children with autism we find test positive versus none of the typical kids. But if you know your child has autism, what's very important is to know, does your child have a yeast infection or bacterial infection or both? And so it can help guide the treatment plan, is use different treatments depending on the type of infection. Also, it tells you if those neurotransmitter precursors that I mentioned are abnormally high, which we've seen in autism. So again, it helps us diagnose. And then by measuring those gluten and casein peptides, it indicates if you have a problem with digesting gluten and casein, because your digestive system should be able to break those peptides down into individual amino acids. They should not be showing up in your urine. So it helps you know if you should be on a gluten casein free diet, or if you're on the diet, it helps you double check that you really are. So what are the advantages of this test? We're working with a company that uses state-of-the-art LCMS. Very important, we have an excellent pediatric reference range based on healthy, typically developing children. Very sadly, many labs use adult reference ranges for children, and often they just use as a reference range people who send them samples, and those people often are sick. That's why they're sending the samples in. So we've been very, very careful to establish an excellent reference range. What I really like about this lab is that it's led by 3 autism dads, each with over 20 years of experience with autism research. Paul Shattuck. All three of them are experts on autism metabolomics, but Paul has been a pioneer in the autism community for over 40 years. He's the past president of the World Autism Organization. We have really top people leading the lab, excellent equipment, excellent reference ranges, and they're very dedicated, as I am, because they have children with autism. So if you're interested in ordering this test, you can go to the website. And everyone who's on this call, by the way, I forgot to say, I'll email you a copy of the PowerPoint presentation. Also, we're recording this, and we'll send out a recording as well if you want to review anything. But also, you can order the test from the Interludos website tonight if you want. Again, it's available. We plan to continue improving it over the next 6 months, but already we believe it's a very, very helpful test for many people. So moving on, the last topic I want to cover tonight is the treatment side. How do we treat the obvious and the hidden gut problems in autism? And this is where the company that I've co-founded, Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics, comes in. So why is it that 90% of people with autism have these extremely elevated levels of these toxic metabolites? Well, it's because they have an infection in their gut, bacterial, yeast, or fungi. What's the cause of those infections? Well, our research and many other people's identified could be due to many things. In some cases, it's due to excess antibiotics during infancy. It can be due to herbicides or pesticides in the food in their home, a poor beginning gut bacteria in the infant, a low fiber diet, too few vegetables, fruit, beans, whole grains. Most people are just not getting nearly enough fiber, so their gut is just starving for butyrate. Many people with autism eat only a limited variety of foods, and therefore they have only a limited variety of gut bacteria. And several major studies have shown people with autism have reduced digestive enzymes, especially lactase, the enzyme needed to digest the sugar in milk, lactose. So these harmful gut microbes, for these different reasons, then go on to produce these toxins that can harm the gut, the body, and the brain, interfere with our neurotransmitters, and worsen cognition, attention, mood, and sleep. So there are many standard treatments for gut problems. I have a mini talk on my website that goes into more discussion of these. But these treatments, unfortunately, are often limited and temporary benefit, and they are not able to reduce the root cause, which is to eliminate these bacterial or yeast infections that are entrenched in children with autism and very, very difficult to remove. Also on our GBAT website, we have more discussion about these advanced treatments, our vitamin mineral supplement to improve overall body health, including gut health, and to help detoxify precresol and other toxins, specialized diets, given extensive talks on possibilities of gluten-free, casein-free, and other diets. We did a major study of trying to customize standard probiotics that had some benefit, and use of antifungals, very important, along with a low-sugar diet to help fight yeast and harmful yeast. What I really want to focus on, what we think is most important, is microbiota transplant therapy. By replacing harmful bacteria with beneficial bacteria, can heal the gut and thereby heal the brain. So what is microbiota transplant therapy? I'll just briefly cover it since we've given many other talks on it. But it's an investigational treatment we've developed and patented to transplant gut bacteria from healthy donors into people with autism. We've had 4 successful clinical trials. We have 2 more trials underway right now. We've observed up to 80% reduction in gut symptoms. We've seen severe autism reduced to mild to moderate autism, sometimes even below the cutoff for mild autism, with benefits lasting 2 or more years. We've seen cases of up to 5 years still doing well. In order to get this treatment approved by the FDA, we needed a lot more money. So we formed Gut-Brain Axis Therapeutics to fund our 2 new clinical trials to try to achieve FDA approval. This is a unique company. It's funded by over 70 autism families to help autism families. And we have openings now for more investors to help us with the final phase 3 clinical trials. So our microbiota transplant therapy involves 3 steps. 2 weeks of a special antibiotic to kill off harmful bacteria, a bowel cleanse to remove much of the remaining bacteria, and then finally 8 to 16 weeks of microbiome capsules from very, very healthy, very carefully tested people. So unlike typical probiotics that contain of order 1 to 10 species of aerobic bacteria that are just a small fraction of what's in your gut, it contains over 400 species, including mostly anaerobic bacteria, which are most of the species in your gut. And it has long-lasting effects on gut microbiome and autism-related symptoms. Our phase 1 study for children showed 80% reduction in gut symptoms. On average, autism severity went from severe, moderate to mild. And this treatment has been very safe. We've had 0 dropouts due to adverse effects in over 120 people we've treated. Our colleagues at the University of Minnesota have treated 8,000 people with a different type of infection called C. difficile, and they also have had 0 serious adverse effects. This is a very safe treatment the way we do it. In our study with adults, randomized double-blind placebo-controlled study, even in adults who had GI symptoms and autism symptoms for 20, 30, 40, 50 years, we were able to substantially decrease their GI symptoms, substantially improve their autism symptoms. The green bars are the treatment group, the orange bars are the placebo group. You can see in many different symptoms, the treatment group outperformed the placebo in a very rigorous study. Just to put that into words, this is a quote from one parent who said, "I believe MTT trial was foundational for my adult son. He seems happier, more well-adjusted, less anxious, less OCD, less troublesome outbursts, much less frequent and less intense. He's sleeping much better, and his daily bowels are regular and normal." Remember what I said about improving neurotransmitters like dopamine and serotonin that affect your happiness, your anxiety, your OCD, your irritability, and also affects melatonin, which is affecting your sleep. So now we're understanding so much more about why MTT is helpful. So what is our path towards FDA approval? We worked with a rare genetic disorder related to autism called Pitt-Hopkins. We successfully treated those children. 6 of 6 substantially improved. We've now started another study for them. What's great is that for rare conditions like Pitt-Hopkins, the FDA requires only minimal studies. And so we hope within a year from now, we'll be able to apply to the FDA for drug approval for MTT for Pitt-Hopkins. At the same time, we want to continue getting drug approval for autism. We've already completed 3 studies there. We're now doing a dosing study as well to determine the optimal dose. Because believe it or not, we think we may have been underdosing. We think that higher dosing may improve symptoms even more than we've seen so far. And so then our big step will be in about a year from now. We hope to do a final phase 3 study if we can raise the money for it. Phase 3 is just like phase 2, but much bigger. Many more sites, probably 250 people. And then when that study finishes, then we'll finally be able to apply for drug approval of MTT for autism. So it's a long path to get there, but we've been making great progress due to the helps of many people. So again, GBAT is a unique company funded by autism families to help autism families. We've already raised $7 million from 70 autism families, average investment of about $100,000 per family. We now need to step up to do the final phase 3 study. We're in the process of trying to raise $20 million for that study. There's a potential for very high profits for investors. This will probably result in billions of dollars a year in sale because there is no drug now for the core symptoms of autism. And this could be the first drug approved for the core symptoms of autism. So if you're interested in making a difference in your child's life and the lives of millions of others, please sign up for one of our future webinars. I list 3 dates here for potential investors. So I hope you forgive a brief sales pitch here. But again, we invite people to consider investing in our company. Because we're a small company, not in a major stock exchange, federal rules restrict investors to be accredited investors, meaning they have to have high income, 200,000 a year, 300,000 a year with their spouse, or assets of $1 million. That's about 20% of the US population. And so we think we'll hopefully be able to find enough autism families lucky enough to be in that category who want to make a difference. So just to summarize what I've covered tonight, and I'll start going through all the questions. Thank you all for being patient. We've discovered 90% of children with autism have extremely elevated levels of any of a wide variety of microbial metabolites from gut bacteria and yeast. But what all these metabolites have in common is they either disrupt the dopamine system or the serotonin and melatonin system. They cause autism symptoms in animals, and those animals can be recovered by microbiota transplant, and we think it's the same story in humans. In terms of testing, we've made great progress. Again, special thanks to my PhD student, Christina, for her great work on this. But we now are offering a test through Analoudos that is a combined gut health test that can tell you, do you have these hidden yeast or bacterial metabolites that are affecting autism symptoms, as well as testing for other related conditions like gluten and casein. And so that test is now available. And then finally, in terms of treatment, microbiota transplant therapy seems to be very promising for positive studies, because what we're doing is we're just naturally replacing harmful gut bacteria with beneficial gut bacteria. It improves GI and autism symptoms, long-lasting benefits. And we just need one final phase 3 study. We hope to start in a year. That hopefully will be the final study to get FDA approval. But we need to raise $20 million to do that. But I'm confident with so many people affected by autism that we'll be able to do that. So there's more information on our website on these different topics. We've posted a number of mini talks there. If you want to learn more about treatments or anything else we've covered, you can go there for more information. But I want to acknowledge the many autism families who've been in our studies, the many groups and autism families that have funded our work, the 70 autism families who are investors in our company GBAT, and our tremendous research team, University of Minnesota that makes these products, and our colleagues at Analoudos who are developing and offering this test. So again, after this talk, if you don't want to share a chat, we don't have time to get to your question, feel free to email me here, and then I'd be happy to take any questions by email as well. But I'm going to try to get through the 62 chats that are there. So I'm going to do my best, but again, it will take a little while. So bear with me as I try to go through them. Okay. So let's see. Will this help explain why some kids regress in their skill development? We don't know for sure, but we suspect that some children develop these infections very early in life, or possibly their mother has an infection during pregnancy, and those are probably the early onset cases. Whereas we think that in other cases, they develop an infection during infancy, and those are the regressive autism cases. So we think it's an infection. We've known for many decades that infection during pregnancy, like rubella, greatly increases the risk of autism. But it turns out that you can have these hidden gut infections, which the mother may not be aware of, or can strike in infancy. So we think this could well explain regression as well. So did we say that this is a urine test? Yes. It's a very simple, non-invasive test. We can do it in stool. We can do it in blood. But we chose to commercialize the urine test first because it's simple and non-invasive. Okay. There's a question about FMT being available now. FMT has been approved by the FDA for preventing the recurrence of C. diff infections. It doesn't treat the C. diff infection. It's not approved for that because the dosing they're using is very low. But there are two commercial products for people with C. diff. I don't recommend them because they're very low dose. For C. diff, it's very easy to treat, 1 to 2 doses, 90% cure rate. In 2 to 3 days, you go from life-threatening diarrhea to being symptom-free and cured usually for the rest of your life. Autism, it's much, much harder. It takes many, many weeks, and it takes much higher dosing, much higher treatment. Plus, one of those treatments is an enema-based treatment. We found that enemas, rectal administration, does not work as well as oral. You naturally get most of your gut bacteria through your food and drink, and the inflammation in the GI tract in autism seems to be throughout the GI tract, not just in the colon, which is why we think a colon administration through an enema would not work as well. Is there a reason testing was done on children up to age 11 years? That was just the age we did in that study. We've now tested adults with autism. We found also that there are elevations there. Some of the metabolites like p-cresol, that's our active work right now. We focused on young children because we were trying to develop a diagnostic test. We didn't realize what the implications were. That not just is it a diagnostic test, but we think it's a major contribution to many autism symptoms. So p-cresol, there are a few labs that can measure p-cresol, but we measure many other metabolites, and we'll have many more as well. We think there is still additional metabolites to find, and we're investigating some additional ones. So our company, GBAT, is funding this metabolite work and helping us to detect many more. So one person says they're 67 and want to undergo FMT. Well, again, we hope that it will be available soon. We're doing our best to raise the money to get the treatment approved by the FDA. But right now, it's only approved for people with C. diff infections. They have a very limited type of treatment that's available. There are many probiotics out there, and I'll just say that we did the largest probiotic study ever, over 300 children with autism, where we customized the probiotic for each person. The limitation of probiotics is that they're only a tiny subset of all the bacteria that are in your gut. The major studies suggest that kids with autism are missing, on average, about 100 different species, but some are missing these 100. Other kids with autism are missing these 100. So probiotics, there have been many studies. They may show some temporary benefit, but they generally don't engraft. When you stop the probiotics, they leave your gut in a week or two, whereas our treatment seems to last in most cases for years. So it's because we're giving the bacteria that are not raised in milk, but we're giving bacteria that are from a healthy human gut. Is there a combination of probiotic that could alter the production of these metabolites? That's what we're in the process of investigating. But again, the best probiotic is, we think, just healthy human gut bacteria. Let's see. How can the child be tested? Well, again, you can just go to a website, the Anna Lewis website tonight, and order the test. They're based in the UK. That's why you can order the test yourself as a parent, because in the UK, they don't require a test to be ordered by a physician. It'll take a few extra days to get the test kit shipped from the UK. But again, we have some great people there. Their lab has been doing autism research for 20 years. They've had a commercial test for 10 years. But now with our help, we've now understand and have much better reference ranges. Is that the reason why children with autism laugh for no reason? We think that one of the major reasons for laughter in autism is due to a yeast infection. They're literally drunk on the metabolites from the yeast. So some people who get drunk can become a very happy drunk, and some people can become a very angry drunk, that they've lost their emotion regulation. And we think that's what's going on with these microbial metabolites. Again, these metabolites are affecting so many other conditions. They affect anxiety and depression and OCD. And that's why microbiota transplant is being investigated for many other mental health conditions. Most mental health conditions, or many of them, are due to abnormal neurotransmitters. But why is it that standard psychiatric drugs don't help much? Because you're not getting rid of the poisons. The poisons are still there. So you might have normal serotonin, but you still have all the poisons from these closely related metabolites that are affecting your neurotransmitters. Must improve nutrient levels in addition to the gut microbiome. Absolutely. We think it's important to have a healthy body. That's why we recommend our vitamin mineral micronutrient supplement that also contains extra sulfate. I mentioned the biggest nutritional deficiency in autism is low sulfate. We now think the reason for that is because the body's using up all its sulfate to get rid of precresol and all these other toxic metabolites that have to be sulfated to be excreted from the body. Precresol doesn't dissolve in water. The body needs to sulfate it so it's become soluble in water so the body can excrete it. Let's see. Thanks for the comment that this is a phenomenal breakthrough. Very exciting. I appreciate that. Are these drugs, are these metabolites like cocaine or LSD? Well, LSD is a fungal metabolite. You can imagine the toxic effect just small amounts of that can have. And again, cocaine greatly affecting your neurotransmitter system. How do we get the microbiota transplant? Well, if you are lucky enough to be enrolled in one of our studies, but otherwise we have to wait for FDA approval. The FDA doesn't allow it to be used except for it has been approved for treating people with C. diff infections. Okay, can you see these metabolites in the oat test? The oat test does measure precresol, but not many of these others. Plus, there are questions. Well, I'll just leave it at that. Again, we think the strength of our lab is we have an excellent pediatric reference range, and we can now use it as a screening tool to help diagnose for autism. Okay. Okay, so someone asked, we've been through all these tests. How do we solve this? Well, again, I have two other talks, mini talks on the websites that talk about the standard treatments that can be used and the advanced treatments. But briefly, vitamin mineral supplement, very important to help restore health, to help the body improves its functioning. Then if their yeast is present, then antifungals with a low sugar diet is very important. But that probably needs to be used for many months, if not much longer, because the yeast have evolved a way to defeat the major part of the immune system in the gut. Our study 12 years ago showed that if you had a yeast infection, you had very low levels of the major defense against yeast, which is secretory IgA. And that's because the yeast make proteases that destroy secretory IgA. So the yeast bacteria have evolved for tens of thousands of years to stay there. And in autism, it's very, very difficult to get rid of them. So we think antifungals and a low sugar diet can help keep the yeast under control, but often we've been told by physicians it will come back when treatment is stopped. The bacteria are even harder to treat because several studies, including one I was involved with, showed we can use antibiotics to kill off these harmful bacteria, but they come right back because you're missing the beneficial bacteria that are needed to prevent the bad bacteria from regrowing. And that's why we are really focused on microbiota transplant because we think that's the ideal way to treat. I know it seems frustrating the treatment isn't available yet. We're working as hard as we can. But the good news is that there's not a time crunch here in the sense that we've treated adults with autism in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and seen improvement. That if that drunk stops drinking alcohol, they're going to get better. And that's, I think, a very simple but accurate way to think about it. Okay, I think I've gone through Oh, no, sorry. Many more questions. Um, can you use this for adults as well? Um, yes, the lab also has reference ranges for adults. Um, so all of the metabolites we've mentioned, we've identified 32. Um, I said many of the most important ones are available now in the Inaludose test. For the next 6 months, we hope to be including most of the rest. Um, but also what's a very simple test just for the gut bacteria that cause obvious gut problems is just to regularly look at your child's stool. So many parents in their studies have told me, I had no idea how bad my child's stool was until I began looking at it. So what we call the toilet test, just looking at the toilet because a third of the stool is gut bacteria. So if it looks abnormal, abnormal color, or if it's unusually hard or very soft or liquidy, then that's a pretty major clue you have abnormal gut bacteria. It's not the only clue because some gut bacteria, some of these bacteria don't have those effects. They primarily just affect the brain. Um, okay. How much does the test cost? So it's priced in British pounds. So it's 205 British pounds, which works out to about $260, roughly. It's not covered by insurance at the moment, but we hope to get it covered by insurance eventually. Um, someone missed where they can order the test. You can order the test through the website shown here at aludos.com. So if we order the test, what will be the answer? What's the end game? Well, again, the test will tell you, do you have a hidden yeast infection or a hidden bacterial infection, or perhaps both? It will tell you how many of those metabolites are elevated and how elevated they are. So do you have a small infection? Do you have a huge infection? So it's kind of like if you have a fever, you want to know if that fever is 101 or is it 105. But also you can use this test to then guide your treatment. Has your treatment actually helped reduce that? So by using this, we can see, are there some probiotics that for some people can provide at least some temporary help? Are you on the right track? Or is that yeast infection return and cause problems? Can you post a link to the testing? I've got it here. Can you share any data that's been correlated with your studies with incidence of seizures? It's a very important question I forgot to mention, is that we know that precresol can cause seizures in animals, and we know in one small study of people with epilepsy, not people with autism, but just people with epilepsy, they had even higher levels of precresol than the general autism population. So we suspect that seizures are due in many cases to these toxic microbial metabolites that are altering neurotransmitter levels. So we don't know that for sure, but in most cases, roughly 80% of cases, we don't know what is causing the seizure, but this seems to be one very likely factor. So we're going to be investigating that. It would be very exciting if we can improve seizures. What I can say is that one person in our study had Tourette syndrome, which is a seizure-like syndrome where they can't control their actions or speech. Within a few weeks of MTT treatment, they were cured of their Tourette's. And they don't use the word cure lightly. Again, I'm not saying that MTT will cure autism. I will say that it will greatly improve GI symptoms and autism symptoms. Again, I'm not saying these microbiota infections are the cause, but I'll say they are a major contributing factor and can cause autism symptoms in animals. What about mycotoxins? Well, mycotoxins also could be a contributing factor, but we have not focused on that. What about parasites? We worked with Doctor's Data Lab. We tested 20 kids with autism for parasites. I think they're one of the best labs for testing, and none of the 20 had parasites. So yes, depending on the part of the world you're in, it is possible that children with autism could have parasites, but so they can certainly have other conditions as well. We can say confidently, they certainly, almost all of them have yeast or bacterial infections in their gut. Um, is the test easy to read and interpret for a layperson? I think so, but you can also go and look at their sample test on the website. And also, we'll be putting together a uh, video on how to help interpret the test. Again, I'm not a physician, but I can give general information about this test because we've put a lot of effort into understanding these microbial metabolites. Um, okay, how do probiotic capsules maintain effectiveness through the stomach acid? So most your stomach acid plays a very important role in killing off harmful bacteria in your food or in your water. So when you take probiotics, most of them will be destroyed by your by your stomach acid in your gut, unless they're specially encapsulated. So our microbiota transplant has been done with capsules that are designed to survive the stomach acid and then open up later. We also have a powder form now that you can just mix with a little bit of milk or yogurt, and then you just take an antacid with it just before you swallow it. So the antacid neutralizes stomach acid for about an hour. The gut bacteria pass through the stomach safely into the gut, and then the rest of the day you have normal stomach acid. So we have two options for delivering microbiota transplant orally. Um, what dose do you think we'll raise to? Well, in our current study, we're going to roughly 2 to 4 times higher than our last study for adults. And so we believe it's very safe. We've already treated a number of children with Pitt Hopkins at even higher dose than we are for autism, and they've been tolerating it well. Um, if you get the test and find the issues, is there no treatment? Again, go see my other talks on our website for a little bit more discussion of those. What I'll do is I'll give another talk that will go through those and answer more questions about those treatments. But you can treat symptoms of constipation. Maybe I should just go back actually to the part of our talk since we're getting a lot of questions on this. Um, so improving diet is so important that getting enough fiber. Most Americans consume less than the half the amount of fiber. Digestive enzymes, especially lactase, can help prevent the sugar being available for gut bacteria. Taking fiber supplements can help. Some probiotics can help somewhat, but again, they're temporary and they're not the right type. Laxatives, enemas, and suppositories can help reduce temporarily the symptoms of constipation, but they're not getting rid of the underlying infection. Antidiarrheals slow the transit of stool through the gut, so there's more time for water to be absorbed. So that helps reduce diarrhea. But again, it's not killing off the infection. Antacids can help with excess acid reflux. We've discovered that MTT is very effective in treating acid reflux because the reflux seems to be due to underlying constipation. The child's so constipated that the food can't go down, so the stomach acid spills back up. And exercise, our national survey found it's one of the most highly rated treatments, but very rarely done. It's one of the less common treatments in autism, but very helpful. If you imagine the extreme opposite case of being in a hospital bed for a week, that's going to be very constipating because you're not moving. So any type of physical movement, walking, running, etc., can help with motility. But again, that won't help you get rid of the infection. Probiotics won't help you get rid of the infection. They can help reduce or balance some of the symptoms temporarily, we think. Specialized diets may help if you're at them for a long enough time. But again, we think much more is needed. And a vitamin mineral supplement can help by restoring body health. Okay, so maybe go on and just try to finish up any more questions. Um, if a person had the gut bacteria analyzed by the American Gut Project or other university program, unfortunately, most of these other programs don't get down to the species or let alone the strain level. So, for example, some of the very harmful species are Clostridium difficile, but some strains of Clostridium difficile cause C. diff infection, and other strains don't. And so you have to have very, very precise methods, which generally aren't available in many cases for bacteria to know. And that's why looking at the metabolite seems much better. Because, for example, there are 60 different bacteria that can make P. cresol, or so testing for all of them is very, very difficult. Um, and so testing for the metabolites is, we think, much more effective because it also tells you are those metabolites getting out of the gut into the rest of the body. Um, if the test of the metabolites is positive, it's unfortunately not enough for the to allow your doctor to prescribe MTT. The FDA views it still as an experimental treatment. We have to wait until it's approved. Your adult son needs help now. Again, you can look at this page and go to the 2 mini talks on our website to talk about other treatments that can help. But again, uh, there's a limit. So hopefully these treatments will help temporarily for some people until we can get MTT approved. Um, yeah, well, it would be great if Elon Musk wanted to help fund this. There are many very wealthy people with autism or children with autism, and some of them have been kind enough to support us, and we hope more will. Um, let's see. We have certainly tried to get funding from the federal government for our research. We did get some funding for our study for adults, but we're now at a much higher level of funding that is normally needed by the National Institute of Health. And generally, they have refused our requests for funding of this work because the gut division says it's an autism problem. The autism division says it's a gut problem. So they just pass us off to other groups. Um, our treatment studies are done. People can enroll across the country in those. Um, have we ever tested breast milk? We have not, but breast milk is very important for infants. It contains very important oligosaccharides that are very important for establishing a healthy gut. So encouraging that is very important. Can our test be used for both adults as well as children? Yes. The reference ranges for adults are published, but we had to establish the reference ranges for children. They just didn't exist. Is there a possibility of regression after MTT? So we've had a few cases of people who have lost benefit after MTT. In some cases, it's due to antibiotics. And we are now, 2 people who have lost benefit, we are now re-enrolling them in our studies. But in most cases, the antibiotics, 1 round of antibiotics is not enough in most cases to cause a loss of benefit. Um, what about fungi? So we are measuring some toxins as well that are made by fungi as well as by yeast. But again, we have more testing to develop. We have more tests to add on to our test. But right now, we can say it's primarily yeast. There are 5 major studies now showing that about half of people with autism have yeast infections. I've been involved with 2 of those. What about kefir and other fermented foods? They're great to have, but again, those represent just a very limited type of bacteria that ferment in the air and not the type of bacteria that colonize the gut. So if people want to be on our email list, please, you can sign up either at our GBAT website or at our ASU website. I should probably go back to list those websites again. Okay, so the websites, if you want to sign up for ASU email list or our GBAT list, you'll get information about our new studies. FMT FMT currently is only used to prevent C. diff infections. They're using very low doses of product that I think is not that great. Um, our colleagues at the University of Minnesota are conducting studies now to treat people with C. diff infection. So using much higher dose from the very best donors. For C. diff infection, almost anyone can be a donor, anyone reasonably healthy. For autism, we've discovered it really matters who the donor is. Even the top few percent healthiest Americans, there's substantial variation as to who are the best donors. Okay. Why is autism higher in boys than girls? It's a great question. We don't have an answer to that yet. So that's something that we need to try to better understand. But what we can address is we hypothesize that the reason autism has been increasing greatly. I mean, when my daughter was diagnosed, it was 1 in 1,000. Now it's 1 in 30. And so we think our genes are not changing. So something's changing in the environment. Unfortunately, it's the antibiotics, pesticides, herbicides, and poor food, low fiber consumption that we think are steadily weakening the microbiome and eliminating more and more species from the guts of healthy people and making them more vulnerable to these infections. Again, we don't know that for sure, but we suspect that this could be one contribution to the increased rate of autism. The test to order at Anna Ludo's website is the combined gut health test. And that's what I labeled it in the PowerPoint as well. Okay, people keep asking questions. I'll keep trying to answer them, but if you've had your questions answered, feel free to sign off. Is it possible to make the FMT palatable for kids who have severe food sensitivities? Many of our kids have severe food sensitivities, and we haven't had a problem getting it into any one of 100 or so people in our study. No, I guess there's one child who just wouldn't even attempt to taste it. But in general, it's so incredibly pure. It's over 99% pure. The powder form is odorless and tasteless. And you just mix it with a little bit of milk or yogurt. Okay, one parent says when my son was 5 years old, he had C. diff. Is that a higher rate in autism? We don't know if it's a higher rate in autism. C. diff primarily affects the elderly. People catch it in nursing homes or hospitals. The elderly immune system is more vulnerable. They have a weakened microbiome. But in children, anyone can catch it. C. diff causes explosive diarrhea, so it is very infectious. Are we accepting adults for our studies? We have already done a study for adults. If we raise enough money, we would love to do a study for adults as well as for children with autism in our final FDA approval studies. Do you have to be in an academic center to be included in our studies? No, we've admitted people from anywhere in the US. Unfortunately, currently we're only admitting people in the US. We may enroll people and we may consider a site outside of the country if we have a source of funding for that. What antifungals for yeast treatments? The two main antifungals that have been used are diflucan and nystatin. And those are, what's very interesting is a national study by Autism Research Institute. They asked 23,000 families what were the most effective treatments for autism. And the top two rated treatments were two antifungals, nystatin and diflucan. And so it's very consistent with our work showing that they are beneficial for fighting yeast infections. But antibiotics, in contrast, tended to worsen symptoms. They're one of the few medications that were tried that worsen symptoms. And that's because you're harming especially some of the beneficial bacteria, whereas there's some very harmful bacteria that are resistant to antibiotics. So we think it's the excess antibiotics that are the contributing problem. What's the minimum investment for investors? Minimum investment is 25,000. Again, people have to be accredited investors. That's just a federal government rule that people have to be accredited investors. If you're on supplements, antifungals, now do you go off them for the test? If you want to know if that antifungal is working, um, uh, if it was me, I would wait till the antifungal is stopped and then do a test a month or two afterwards, or especially if you've seen the symptoms have changed. My father, when he was older, would often get a urinary tract infection, and we could tell from his symptoms. His dementia worsened greatly, and we would then go and treat him with an antibiotic, or in one case, it had to be an antifungal, and then his cognition would improve a fair bit. So these gut bacteria don't only affect people with autism, they can affect, we think that many cases of depression, anxiety, OCD, there's growing evidence in seizures. There's growing evidence that these are related to abnormal gut bacteria. Um, let's see. Okay. Will MTT work if you have SIBO? Well, we think that most children with autism in our studies, we think that a fair number of them probably had SIBO as well, but I can't say that we specifically were able to test for that. But again, we know that SIBO is due to abnormal gut bacteria. We think MTT is able to greatly affect that. A question, do we think the new administration with Bobby Kennedy or Trump will help? It would be great if it did. It's hard to know. When will this data be published? We're working on writing it up. So hopefully in a couple months, we'll be able to submit the data from this study. Is a way to participate in the study. So we try to advertise our studies very well to everyone on our mailing list, but we have huge numbers of applicants, typically 1,000 people for 50 slots. Mold, we certainly think can be a problem. Mold certainly is an issue, but we have not been specifically looking at the toxins from mold. That requires a different type of test to look for that. So mold, I think, could be a contributing factor. All I can say is we are very confident that yeast and bacterial metabolites in the gut are contributing to 90% of kids with autism. But I suspect there's a subset who also have toxins from mold, and your body has limited ability to detoxify. So in the same way that if you're taking certain psychiatric medications or any medication, you want to be cautious about drinking alcohol. You don't want to overwhelm your body's detoxification system. Why does autism run in families? Well, we know autism is highly hereditary, and you can inherit your gut bacteria from your mother, but also be exposed. So that could be one contributing factor. What antacid do you recommend? Let's see, we are using Gerylanta in our current study because it acts for only an hour. But we've also used Prilosec, which suppresses stomach acid. We don't think it matters too much which antacid you use. There are many that are effective. Nystatin, the other one is called diflucan. Nystatin is a little safer because it stays in the gut and only acts in the gut. Diflucan is systemic, so it goes throughout the body. So it does require the liver and kidneys to process it. So you do want to work with your physician on either of those. Those are prescription antifungals, so you need to have a physician prescribe them. If you sign up for an email list, you will certainly get information about our future studies and how to apply for them. How do you become an accredited investor? You simply, if you have that level of income or assets, then you qualify. And we can explain the very simple process for that. We still use vancomycin? We use vancomycin because it's very effective in killing off the harmful bacteria that produce P. cresol and many other um, uh, dangerous toxins. But it's only temporary. We are trying to raise money for a much better antibiotic that's much more targeted. And if we had $4 million, we'd do the study for what we think is an even better antibiotic that's much more targeted. Um, okay. So what is an accredited investor? So the federal government is trying to protect people who are not very knowledgeable about investing. So anyone can buy stock on the New York Stock Exchange or other major stock exchanges. But if you want to invest in a small private company like ours, the federal government only allows what are called friends and family. So my family members can invest in my company or my friends, but otherwise you have to be an accredited investor, meaning the person who's relatively wealthy, income of 200,000 a year, or 300,000 with a spouse, or a million in assets, because then they figure you know enough to be able to make a safe judgment about whether or not you can invest. Um, and I think that's it for questions. So I'm going to sign off. I want to thank you all very much for listening and for your patience. I will save this recording and post it. And also, since you registered for the talk, I'll also email you all a copy of the PowerPoint so you can look through it. Feel free to email me any questions afterwards, and I'll try to answer those. There's also a lot, just made a major upgrade to our GBAT website. There's a bunch of mini talks there that give hopefully a lot of other good information. Thank you all for your kind messages in the chat. I really appreciate you. Again, it's over 1,000 families have been supported us. It's only by working together we've been able to make it this far. So I'm very grateful and thank everyone who has been supporting us for all their help. So thank you all.